So the little recording we do this afternoon, we're going to focus on the change from first year to second year, the evolution year by year, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, because I've only got 3 points, so
Yeah.
that might be it. It might just be three QR codes, and we
Mm.
can talk through them, or we can do additional QR codes if you think we need to.
Yeah. I think there's also scope to do one, like to talk through the specific process.
Oh yeah, okay.
But anyway, yeah,
Let's do that another
yeah,
day.
yeah.
Only because I think we'll need more time.
Yeah, all good. Yeah, let's just do these little bits now and then
Yeah. Okay, so our first year, we had an introductory PD day for all leaders in the system to build an understanding of the why for data and particularly in understanding their data to make decisions. So that was a general 1 day PD. And then we had the school clusters for the first time after that, the school cluster workshops. And what was the key focus for that, Selena? Like we had the pillars and the Gantt chart, didn't we?
we did have the Gantt chart. We were talking, I think, more broadly at that point about the
Mm-hmm.
data that mattered to them.
Yes,
It wasn't specifically attached at that point to school improvement. It was
right.
more trying to build capacity and understanding of what data, what they valued, where.
Getting them into the data, wasn't it? Like getting their hands dirty in the data
Yeah,
as
absolutely.
principals and exec. Yep.
And they did, remember, they did the diagnostic. So a lot of them had the diagnostic results from their school, and they were starting to kind of think about, well, where are our staff at in terms of their strengths and where do we focus our attention? So that
Yes.
first year was kind of focused more on building the data literacy, visualization, storytelling skills of themselves primarily, but also thinking about where everybody else was at.
Yeah, and I think we got real traction with that. I think the schools or the leadership in schools particularly resonated with the survey that you've given them regarding where their staff was sitting in their data literacy, and it kind of highlighted a that we're not very good at filling in surveys, but b that people had rated themselves pretty low, and so it wasn't something that a leadership team could just say that's their job, they'll know how to do it.
Mm. Yeah. And as a system, I mean, you'd already obviously identified before I got there, you'd identified that there was a need for building capacity across the school in their use of data because
Yeah, that came through our SIT review, the system SIT.
yeah,
Um, yeah, that
yeah,
was an area to focus on.
because I think it's useful for people to kind of also know the context of the previous model that you had done in the Northern Territory, which I think was pretty innovative, really. Like I haven't seen it exist anywhere else other than your system, but
The
having the,
data informed practitioner project.
yeah, in every school. Do you want to maybe talk to that? And I guess why you went from that to working with me and the way that we've done it, because it's a very different approach.
Yeah, so that was a project that was federally funded, or we used federal funding for, and it was again to try and build the capacity of schools in analysing their data and using it effectively for school improvement, not necessarily for strategic planning, but for school improvement. So we had a data informed practitioner network, and there was one nominated person from each school who became a data informed practitioner, and they were matched up with a buddy from within the office. So, I was the buddy for some of the schools remote, for example. And they worked really closely to analyse particularly their NAPLAN and CAP data and to support staff in understanding what the data said. So what the information for those kids in the classroom. And it was really successful. The networks were really targeted about building capacity, and it created a lot of positive impact. Really, we had data walls in schools. There were collaborative data meetings between assistant teachers or ISAs and classroom teachers. So yeah, it was really successful. But it did rely on the funding. So once that funding finished, the aim was that it would be sustainable through those experts in the school. Um, However, with that context, the turnover of staff is so huge that those experts in a lot of schools disappeared. And it also created a culture of thinking that it was just that person's job. The data analysis, the data action was for one person. So when we came back to that SIT review, where it recognised that we weren't strong at a system level in our data literacy and using data for impact, we thought we've got to consider how to build the capacity of leadership teams so that it is a more sustainable model, but also that it potentially has more traction because it's the leadership level that's making the big decisions about schools. So they need to be able to look through that data.
Yeah. And that's also the evolution, and we've talked about it before, but the evolution of the way we now know data is most effectively used is when it's in the hands of everybody who can have an impact on
Yes.
every young person, as opposed to, 10 to 20 years ago, the model was one person in charge of distributing data. It was kind of their responsibility.
Yeah, and we were able to see at the end of that project, which I think was for 5 years, that the schools that had had the biggest impact on certainly was that their data informed practitioner was a very collaborative person, so they
Yeah.
shared that information. Whereas for other schools, it was a knowledgeable person sitting in their office just trawling through the data and getting excited and not necessarily sharing any of that.
Yeah.
So that certainly was consideration. And yeah, that project was, it started 10 years ago, I think. So it had finished, had been finished for a good few years before we got on board with you. And that was the consideration. We wanted someone got Australian data and context, and that we would be able to interact with, frequently because we're remote, and, move and really focus on the why.
Hmm.
And that was you.
So do you think it's worth talking through, after that first year, we, I guess, created a template, didn't we? We created a bit of a model, and the plan was to have,
Yeah, well, we went to the template because we identified that it had been a little bit free rein,
yeah,
and we probably really made some assumptions about the capacity of people to go into schools and continue their work around the use of that data, and it didn't really get traction, did it? They would come back and nothing had happened in between, so they'd come back in the next term and they hadn't really been able to action much. So the big change for us was thinking, okay, we need to scaffold this. It needs to be a much more explicit process that that means that everyone is supported both in the clusters and their planning of really clear, actionable goals, that they're able to plan how they're going to measure it and what data they're going to collect, because that hadn't happened. That hadn't happened in that first year.
yeah. And I think, as you say, it was kind of a bit ad hoc to begin with because we were trying to build capacity in different areas, but then there
And we
was,
wanted to be flexible.
yeah, absolutely, because there were people with really different levels of experience, and there were people in leadership roles who had been the dip in previous schools, and then there were other people who were brand new to kind of a data conversation. So it was really like in every school I work in, it's just a really different kind of ability. But I think, when we then, after kind of that first bit, we decided that we'd meet with people. And I guess as a system, you said, well, we want this to be centralized. We want to work with them deliberately once a term, for example, in these cluster groups. And we want to connect it to, I guess, a bigger picture rather than it just being kind of standalone workshops, which was why we went to this action research or inquiry cycle. Um,
Yeah.
where we guided people through the process, and then they worked with you and your team. And then I was obviously there, and we, as you say, we scaffolded it pretty heavily, didn't we? And that's then
Around having a
goal.
specific goal, like so to
Yeah,
say, look at your data, what do you want to change?
yeah,
Um, yeah, so to have a specific project goal
yeah.
that they would continue working, that we could check in on throughout the year.
Yeah. And so I remember, in that year, I mean, this has been what, 4 years now. In that year, initially, we were really doing like data literacy work around PAT data when that came out. We were doing data literacy work around NAPLAN data when they got that. So it was kind of all different bits of learning as they needed it, but it was all framed in the context of school improvement and the focus on a particular goal. And I think really early on, what you did, I think, which was a great call, was to get them to connect that project to something that they've already said they're going to be doing in their annual school improvement plan. And so while they've all got a couple of goals each, they've been able to kind of focus on one through this process. And I'd like to think that, it's us walking alongside them and helping them get really tangible evidence of the impact they've had and be able to talk to the successes they've had, talk to I guess, the aspects that haven't moved as much as they would like, and then get them also thinking about the following year.
Well, that was the second big change, and I think that actually came through in the third year, which was spending more time reflecting
Mm.
and reviewing. So again, that second year, yes, we set it up so that there was more specific goals, that there was a procedure, like that
Yeah,
action research cycle, that all the steps were scaffolded, including how they would implement the action at school and how they would monitor the impact. That was supported. Um, but I think it was the third year the big change was recognising that when they came back in to work with us in term 2 and 3, to make the time and to help them articulate to what degree they've been successful with implementing the action plan. I think that was a big change that was really important, that we provided that time. Whereas, again, the second year we just sort of came in and went to the next step.
yeah. I think we assumed that they had done a bit of that work and reflection before they arrived, and they just don't
Yes.
have the time and space to do that in a school context. And I remember people saying regularly early on, I just really love having this time. Like, this is just such
Yes.
a good time and it's that whole working on the business idea versus in the business. People physically leaving their school, being in a different context, like, it actually has just given them space to think about their school improvement priorities.
But I don't think that came in until the third year. Like, we
Yeah,
really targeted that. We changed
yeah,
it because in year 2, when we introduced that cycle, the term 2 meeting, the term 3 meeting were next steps.
yeah,
Whereas in year 3, we made that term 2 and term 3 meeting both focus on analysing the impact,
yeah.
reflect, refine, and adjust. And I think that made a huge difference. And
Hmm.
that's when people started saying, we really value this time
Yeah,
to reflect. And also, it was that third year that we targeted their annual improvement goal to be a bit more data focused. Again,
yeah,
year 2, some of those annual improvement goals that they were actioning were great, but they hadn't been informed by data. So it's
yeah,
like, why did you choose this? Just because somebody
yeah,
up the road was doing it, or you know? So year 3 was far more targeted, I think, in that
yeah.
respect, and that review component was really exciting.
Yeah. I think for me as well, what I've seen the evolution of the goals that they've written in those annual school improvement plans over time. They
Yes.
have become more
Yeah.
refined, more data informed. But, initially they were so big and vague, and equally, I always talk about when we can see the impact and the change that's taken place, it's professionally rewarding for us. And equally, I think when we set goals that are too lofty, too big, too abstract, we then kind of get to the end of the year and think, oh, well, we haven't been successful. But
Yes.
we've really seen their goals be more narrow and sharp and focused throughout this process. And I'm sure you won't mind me saying, but there are schools who weren't involved for a couple of years and have come in recently, and you can see how different their goals are. They're much the same as where the other schools were kind of 2 years prior.
And the other thing is, it's modelling how to work collaboratively with your
Yeah,
executive team. And
yeah.
we didn't really probably think about that.
Mm,
But originally it was really just principals, maybe, and one other.
mm,
But the schools who have had, and it's hard, it's hard to get people out of schools because we don't have the relief teachers, they're all short staffed anyway. But those schools that did bring more than themselves, or more than 2 people even, have said how it has brought them together to understand how to work together to both create a goal and action it and measure the impact. So it's inadvertently, I don't think we were necessarily thinking about that, but it's modelled effective collaborative processes in schools.
yeah. I think the other unintended impact that we've definitely seen is the clusters and how much they enjoy hearing from one another.
Yes, and I was going to say that because, again, that second year we didn't
We
allow
did
as much
some
time for
one-on-ones,
sharing.
didn't we? And remember that
Yeah,
we did some online and it was just us with one school. And the feedback we got was, I actually want to be in a room with people talking about what they're doing as well and learning from them. Mm.
and then they started teaming up a little bit where it's like a secondary school wanted to be in a cluster with this primary school because their goal was interesting. So that
Yeah.
was a great um, connection, I guess, that they
Yeah.
were able to learn from each other despite being different types of schools.
Yeah. And
Um,
having the five remotes together, obviously the remotes are just facing very different challenges to the urban schools. So
yeah,
just
being able
being
to
able to,
celebrate their goals and successes because they
yeah,
had, yeah.
yeah,
But I think I feel, again, having been part of it that whole time, that the principals and the leadership teams are having more conversations, to share what they're doing and how and why. Like it's opened up an opportunity to say, I don't know how to do that. How do you do that?
yeah,
That
absolutely.
hasn't been something we've offered the opportunity for, in the past. And networks have been primarily to support either professional learning or governance issues, compliance. It hasn't been, hey, what are your challenges? Let's
Yeah.
use that shared experience. So it's certainly, and again, I think that year three, those clusters really took off for that, and it probably was just building a bit of trust and momentum,
Yeah, and
trust in the
confidence in
process.
what they were doing. And yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So then I think the next big, for me, with the next big change moment was I've called it the success through failure
Yep.
moment of one of our schools when they came in, and I think this was still the third year, wasn't it? Was it last year? No, it was last year, the fourth year, where again, it's having a bit of experience and confidence in the process and being open to being a bit vulnerable. That a principal and a couple of their exec team came in and they're like, we've just realised this was our goal and this is what we spent 2 terms actioning to achieve that goal, and it's not working.
Mm.
It's not getting any traction. No one cares about it.
Yeah.
So they were kind of a bit defeated, but I got really excited because I'm like, that is such an important moment to say
Yeah.
this isn't working. Why? So because we unpacked with them, I don't know if you remember that, but we asked,
Yeah.
why do you think it's not getting the impact that you wanted? So they
Mm.
were talking through that and reflecting, and it's like, okay, well, how do you still achieve that goal? What's another strategy? So it was the moment of pivoting,
Mm.
um, and that has come through, I reckon, in that year four, where in the feedback they talked to having to be flexible.
Yeah.
So we were really, I think, intentional too. I asked a couple of principals to speak to the principals network about
Mm.
not their goal and what they achieved, but what they learned as leaders.
Yes. Yeah.
And that was great because that was quite varied. And I think that, again, has been an unintentional success or
Yeah.
impact that they're thinking about what they're learning as leaders
As
leading
leaders.
school improvement.
Yeah. As well as then what they've learned about the school community and the students and the achievement and the impact on them, being able to then also reflect on, yeah, their learnings has been really powerful.
Yep. And look, I've just looked at one school, one annual school improvement plan that's been data informed in terms of the data they got from their external review, the SIG review, and in this through this process, and it's so good. And they've worked with staff on it. It's just we're at a very different stage in our annual school improvement planning than we were,
Mm.
4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, very exciting. I don't know how we could make it even better. That's what I'm a bit concerned about.
Yeah. Had some karaoke. Oh, okay. Are we done?
Yeah, that was great, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think that's good.
We should do a podcast.